Welcome to episode 3 of The Way, a RUDIS wrestling podcast with Cary Kolat and myself, Matt Dernlan. Cary, how's it going?
Good, man. How are you? Been a crazy week, huh?
Good. Yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah.
you guys back in session now?
Yeah, yep, we're back. We got, obviously we did Midlands over the course of the holiday break and then we just took some guys to the Franklin and Marshall Open. We didn't send all of our guys. We got some guys that needed some more experience, some backups, some red shirts and now we start getting into our dual meets part of the season.
So I know we mentioned it last week, I think a couple times, and I don't want to shamelessly promote your program, but you guys had a great effort at the Midlands.
Yeah, yeah, we finished 10th. We're from where we started, we're coming up. We're starting to become a solidified team on the scene, and now it's about how high you're going to take your program, whether it's going to be a top 20 program consistently or a top 10 program consistently. So we still have a lot of room to grow, and so we're getting there.
And I mean, this is some of the stuff we've talked about in the previous 2 podcasts, but a lot of folks kind of tend to focus on the top rung of the ladder. Like
Yeah.
once you get to the top rung, like that's all I've been aiming for. But along the way, it's like taking one rung at a time and appreciating that rung, appreciating the next step up the ladder. And I think that's something tangible with your guys. You know, placing guys at the Midlands, placing in the top 10. I mean, that's another step along the journey, right?
Yeah, you're right. Like, you have to learn to appreciate it when you're like in your younger years. As we all get older, we get a little wiser, right? But when you're young and hungry, all you can think about is being at the top, and but you forget how you got there. And wrestling programs are the same way. Like, there's steps. Like, you have to go through all the steps before you get to be on top, and a lot of people forget those steps and they want to rush. And when you rush, you make mistakes. And you got to make sure you build your foundation correctly in terms of the kids you bring in and the culture you create and your staff, and everybody's on the same page. And if you rush it, you make mistakes.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of like a perfect segue into chapter 3 here of
Yeah.
Switch, which is scripting the critical moves. So I don't know if you want to give an overview of chapter 3, or I think yeah, I'll just turn it over to you and allow you to uh, kind of lay out what chapter 3 really entailed.
Yeah, and it's really kind of self explanatory if you're following along in the book, and if some of you ever went out and picked it up and kind of following along with Matt and I. But the chapter is scripting the critical moves, and it talks about it goes through a few different case studies or situations in the business world and the medical world of how people basically laid it out. So the people in their organization or the people following them, you know they took the stress of thinking, really. I guess we could say that, because the book goes back to the analytical side of people, and the scripting the critical moves takes the stress away for the people in your organization. They don't have to think about it. And as the leader, that's really important. Is scripting is communicating, and communicating clearly, but what you communicate, what are the points? And most of the points in this chapter, between the case studies that they did, there's not 50 points. It's usually 3 to 4 key areas of the organization, or what they want to accomplish, to script it out for people to follow along, make it easy. And when you do that, you can actually make a change in the person or make a change in the organization, and so that's basically what chapter 3 is going to be talking about.
Yeah, and I think the one of the things that really resonated to me, and it came on early on in the chapter, was talking about decision paralysis. And I think a lot
Yeah.
of times when we think about decision paralysis, that's basically, for a lack of a better term, they're breaking down like overthinking, overanalyzing, talking too much about what you really need to do to change. And they provided several examples where when you were the more the more choices you were presented, the harder it was to actually come to a decision on what you should actually do. Um, and I think a lot of times we equate that, or we point the finger at kids, and they're overthinking. But I think a lot of times, it stems from the coach. I think, you know, decision paralysis. I mean, when you're in it, there's so many things that, people don't hear behind closed doors, like you and your staff when you're, you know, trying to make a decision. Like it's something for a lot of people that may be as simple as like, do you pull a kid out of redshirt or do you keep him in? A lot of people
Right.
think that's a simple choice, but when you get behind closed doors and you and your coaches are really breaking down, you know, all the dynamics that go into this decision, it's not really ever as simple as like making a choice. So I think for us as coaches, you know, we need to learn how to navigate through that minefield of like overthinking. Some of the things that we're trying to stop in our athletes, we also have to recognize in ourselves that we have a tendency to overthink on a lot of levels, and it really impedes, our impetus to actually change, right?
Yeah, you're right. There are a ton of things that happen behind closed doors, and fans don't always get it, and parents don't always get it. But when we're laying out our program, we're thinking about our current lineup. We're thinking about our needs at the time, and then we're also trying to think about our future. And then things happen, injuries happen, and you got to try to, think ahead in that area. And if we pull this guy or don't pull that guy, right? So there's a lot that goes into it. But what you have to try to do is really try to, have some key areas that you think, maybe 4 to 5 areas that run your program when it comes to picking your starting lineup. 4 to 5 things that you look for when we're recruiting a kid. Obviously there's academics and knowing your school, right? So, you have a box that you check, and this is the GPA or the test scores we're looking for. Then we're looking at the style of the kid, and does that style fit our needs? And when I say style, I don't really want a style of my whole team being the same way, but I want to have something close that the kid brings some creativity, but he also falls in line with some of the common things that we do, which only helps us. And then his creativity expands your room, and there's all kind of stuff like that. That when you're running a program, managing a kid middly. But when you said like people can get caught up, I'll tell you where I see this happen the most, and this is where, like with recruiting, right? We deal with people all the time, and you used to deal with them. How many people did you come across, Matt, where they were just, you could tell that they probably had 80 pros and cons list when they went home. And, I always tell people like that can only go on so long, and there's really only two things that need to be in play here. One, quickly, the academics, the program. Do you feel like the program's going in the right direction? Do you think the programs are going to fit for you? So you check those boxes out, and then next is, how do you feel? Like your gut, like the emotional side. Does your gut say this is right? And then at that point, you got to make a decision. You got to move on. I think taking 5 visits, when we talk about in the book, there's a section in there about the doctors where they were talking about hip replacement surgery. And, doctors don't always wanna do surgery. It's evasive, errors can happen, infections can happen. And so when they got to a patient where they ran him down through everything they could do, and they said, "We're about to do hip replacement surgery," and then they presented the doctor with just one more drug. And they said, "This drug may be able to actually take the pain away and fix this patient. Are you willing to try it?" And almost all the doctors said yes. Like they'd rather go with one more drug. But when they did the same scenario, patients in pain, and they presented the doctor with two different drugs, most of the doctors, I think it was, what, 60% went to and said, "Let's just go ahead and do the surgery." And that's what scripting the critical moves about, or as you say, paralysis, because you're over analyzing. The more options people have, sometimes the crazier they get, the more cloudy I think their decision making process gets. And recruiting, it's the same thing. I see recruits and moms and dads just over analyze things, and I think, you got to shut down more of the pros and cons, and go with your, the 4 or 5 things that you're going to gauge a school on, and then go with your gut. And I think taking 5 visits is crazy. You know, I I mean, I feel like you can narrow it down to almost 3 schools, and from there, you can pretty much make a decision and take your visits, man. I see people taking all 5. I just think you're just causing more headache for yourself.
No, I think you're absolutely right in the sense like, it's every kid's dream to be recruited coming out of high school, right? And so
Right.
there's kind of a sense of novelty of what this experience is actually going to be like, and what kids quickly find out and parents quickly find out is like, man, how do I sift through all this information? Because I would tell people, I'm like, look, everywhere you go is gonna look good, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
everywhere.
every coach, every staff is gonna put their best foot forward, you know? They're gonna try and present all the positive that a university, um, all the positive things that a university offers, but, you can quickly get, you know, sucked in this level of redundancy, like, all of a sudden, all these things and all these places and all these coaches start sounding the same. So I
Yeah,
think you're absolutely right that really what it comes down to is that does it feel right? Does it feel right? Do I like the coaches? Do I like the
yeah,
school? Do I like the guys in the team? Because that's really what it boils down to is if you're going to be successful at this level, the most fundamental thing, and I know it sounds cliche, but you really have to be content where you are. You have to be
yeah,
happy at the place you're at with the people you're around and the coaches that are pushing you every single day. And it's easy to go down a rabbit hole and you know analyze workout partners. Do I have my own individual coach? What's my depth? Am I going to be the starting guy? How much money are they offering me? Do they have my major? Um, are they going to pay for this or that? And it all those things are important, but they distract you from the most fundamental thing. And is this the place that I feel content? Is this a place that I can feel happy? And if I have those two things in place, you know, all those other things tend to work themselves out by and large. But I think that, we're pinpointing recruiting right now and how to simplify recruiting, but I think the role as a head coach, when he's looking at all the areas of his program, when you're looking at, recruiting, when you're looking at competition, when you're looking at training, when you're looking at academics, you really I mean, it's the job of a coach to really simplify the path, you know, for your team and for each individual guy. And
yeah,
a lot of times we can get, you know, we as coaches get caught up in the minutia of all those other things too, and we start getting consumed by all these things. And I think it's critical for an effective head coach is to recognize when you're getting caught in the fray, and separate those things and really focus on and reference back to the most critical things in each one of those areas at that given time.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Again, back to this section in the book, and we were just talking about, applying it to recruiting a little bit. And then when you start applying it, if you're a coach out there listening, chapter 3 is scripting the critical moves. I didn't realize how much this was done for me. Bruce Burnett, when we were on the world team, was, I mean, as much as you and I talk, I'll probably bring up Bruce a lot of the times because I learned a lot from him. I remember being at the World Championships, my first trip. We'd been overseas for a while and made multiple stops in different countries because we were doing multiple time zones, so we were acclimating. And I remember I didn't know what was going on, and I walked down to Bruce's room because I didn't know what time we were leaving or something like that. When I went there, Bruce had already had an itinerary, brought a little printer along with him, a little portable printer back then, which was pretty cool back in the 90s. Now we get all kind of stuff, but he had the itinerary printed out for the next 2 days. What time to eat, what time we were going to catch be on the bus to get to the arena, what time we would start the warm up, what time the weigh in was. And, I didn't realize he had taken all the questions that I could have possibly had, he answered with that itinerary. An itinerary is not a big deal, right? But I'll tell you why an itinerary is a big deal is when you forget to do one. I just our first trip this year, I've read this book several times and I'll go back to it, as a head coach. In the first trip of the year, we went to the Hockey Open with our team. Not a big deal. 4-hour drive. Okay, guys, we're gonna leave at this time. And I was kinda just, like, winging it, we've done this trip multiple times, and I didn't realize how much I had disrupted my staff's life and the guys in terms of not laying those things out, just as simple as what time we're gonna have our team meeting, what time I thought we could get out there and use the group chat, and I'd say, "Okay, come to my room at this time," but what time we're gonna have the meeting, because guys need to plan what time they were going to cut weight so they didn't miss the meeting, what time we're going to be in the van. And so that gets back to scripting critical moves as a head coach, because you don't realize if you can do those things, it takes a lot of the thought process out for your athlete. And then what you're ultimately doing, not only in the training side of it, but you're saving his mental capacity for the event. It's less he has to think, and it's less of these little things that you don't think are much, but they wear down on him. It'll wear him down over time. So you want to make sure you communicate as much as just an itinerary when you're going on a trip because it'll save those guys.
No, without a doubt. I mean, that's one of the phrases that I would use with my guys, fairly often was clearing the mechanism. And by clearing the mechanism, I meant to be your most effective, like, you've got to have a clear mind and a clear focus. And
Yeah,
so a lot of those things that you think are inconsequential, like what time is the bus getting here? What hotel are we staying at? When are we warming up? When are we doing our pre-match? When are weigh-ins? When's the first round? All these little things, like, if guys have to figure them out themselves, it's cluttering their mind, and it's
yeah,
defeating what I was talking about. Is by the time we enter into competition, you know, they shouldn't have to think at all. All they should
right.
have to think is that, "What do I need to focus on to be my best?" And by providing something as simplistic as an itinerary for a two-day trip, that could be, without that at their disposal, that could be the one thing that trips them up because, they didn't get their weight down in time, and so they had to rush, and so, they didn't have enough time to recover for the first round, and it tripped them up, and they, you know, so those little things, as the chapter laid out about scripting the critical moves, that's just one simple thing. But in the
Yeah,
overarching grand scheme of things, you're trying to, provide an itinerary, or basically trying to provide a simplistic blueprint by, this is how we train, this is how we compete, this is how we perform in the classroom, this is how we act in the community. If you can have, you know, a blueprint or an itinerary, for lack of a better term, that highlights 3 or 4 simple things that can kind of focus them in and zero them in when they have to phase in and phase out of each and every one of these little areas of their life, whether it's academics, whether it's training, whether it's weight control, whether it's rest and recovery. If you can give those guys simple blueprints, like an itinerary for a weekend trip, it all of a sudden kind of makes things a little bit more tangible, and, for your student athletes.
yeah, yeah. For me, as an athlete, it was really important. Like I always had it laid out for me, like how many sets of clothes I was going to take to a competition. I had food for after every single match, whether I was hungry or not. After every time I competed, I back then it was power bars. I always had a power bar. I always drank a certain amount of fluid. Always had my cool down. And then there was times where I would take my shoes off, and if I knew I had, once I found out exactly how much time I had, okay, 2 hours, shoes off, eyes closed, mind clear. I'm not thinking about wrestling. When I was coaching the Fargo team for Maryland years ago, I was really pushing that on the guys on the team because Fargo, is a marathon, right? It's an enormous tournament. It's multiple matches, every single day. And I tell them there are a lot of guys who become Fargo champions not because of how good they are. It's because of that tournament management. Because I've seen so many guys that have an excellent first round, second round, third round. When you start getting 5 rounds deep, and then I saw it all the time. You see the kid who goes out there and just fatigues, and it's not fatigue of I'm not in shape for the competition. It's because he's been sitting around all day and he forgot to eat. And he literally has no energy because it hadn't been laid out for him. and so we had done that when I took Maryland out years ago, and we had a really good Fargo showing. And hadn't had one in a while, and management of the tournament was a big part of it. We had guys who overperformed past where they should have performed just on, being smart throughout the day for, 3, 4 days, whatever it might have been. And, so it is important, those simple things. And then, obviously you get into the bigger picture stuff. And when you get into big picture stuff, this is where you can make the mistake again. So if you're running an organization or you're trying to change a high school program that you just took over, a college program, you really can't go past having 5 key points to run the program, because when you get past those 5 key points, then you start to lose people, because it gets back to, we talked about where the people had multiple choices. It's like a big menu at the restaurant, right? When you go there and the menu's like 10 pages long, it's hard to make up your mind. And, when you go and it's just a couple pages, here's your choices. It allows you to free up, your capacity to think clearly, and you don't have all these other choices. Same with running a program. You need to, if you're trying to change a program, whether, this is what we want to do academically, this is what we want to do as a unit when we train or practice. This is how we want to compete. This is how our team should be reflected when they go out there. These are how our fans act, and then this is how we act socially. I don't think you can go past those 5 key areas for the most part to change a program and really be effective at changing a program.
Yeah, I think with at one of the programs I coached at, one of the things you always assess and inventory your program every year, and you kind of analyze with your staff and break down like what are our where areas of weakness, and what do we have to improve upon. And going into the next year, that's kind of like, you know your trigger word for the entire season, for the entire program. And I
Right.
think at this program I was at, I it seemed like the simplest thing in the world to talk about. Like, we just lack toughness. And I think when you throw that word out there and, you talk to your guys about it, it's like, guys, after, reviewing, assessing this year, one of the fundamental things that we're lacking is toughness. And I think to the casual observer that would think, oh, that's just an X's and O's things. That's just your effort on the mat. And I had to break it down to the guys. I'm like, guys, toughness is the discipline that's going to define every waking action of our day and our life. And toughness needs to be, you know, our approach to not just how we train every day or how we compete. It's also, to what you were saying, it's toughness in our discipline in how we live our life, how we discipline, and regiment our lifestyle. Are we getting proper rest? Are we getting proper recovery? Are we competing hard in the classroom? And are we so I think when you for me in this instance, it was, if we can get toughness, or for lack of a better term, discipline, instilled in every of the critical areas of the program, which is recruiting, which is academics, which is the way we compete, which is the way we live our life. When you're setting a bar and setting an attitude of toughness and discipline, you know, what in those critical moments when you have opportunities to take an out in a tough match, if you've conditioned yourself not to take an out in any area of your life, then you're not going to do it in that critical moment of a match.
Right.
And I think being able to relate those things to guys, like, guys, academics, taking pride and taking an attitude of toughness in your academics, because a lot of guys, like, I get it. A lot of guys that come to your school, they just want to wrestle. Um, but getting them to connect with the importance of those other seemingly um, less important areas are typically some of the areas that expose your weakness at critical moments in wrestling, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I think, in a long-winded way, I'm like, what I tried to do in that situation was like, come up with a defining statement that you could relate to all the other critical areas of your program, and make it communicate it in a meaningful way, and a way that's very tangible for the guys to relate in every area. And so in this case, in the program I was at, it came down to toughness. And defining what toughness is in every area that's crucial for high level performance in your program.
Yeah, and it you know, and listening to you, it sounds like what we always get back to, and everything is do the details, right? Like you get the big part of it, the big picture of it finished, and then there's all these little details that slip through the cracks because you don't consider them important, but the details are the most important, right? It's you know it's the windows that go into the house when you're done. You put them in crooked, the whole house looks terrible after you built this beautiful house, or you know, the icing on the cake. I mean, it's the details that finally finish things, and that's, you know, for you when you were doing it, it sounds like that's how you defined it with the toughness. I'll tell you right now, we're in the second phase of the season, right? And if you remember back when you were coach, what happens after Christmas? People change. You know, it's some guys come back with oh man, we still have this you know, I approached it after Christmas was like, wow, we only have 2.5 months left. Like this thing is really rolling by. And I approached it like that as an athlete and I approach it like that as a coach. And I think as an athlete, that's why I had success. Cause I was like, man, we're getting close. Like this thing's almost over. Like, you know, for me, it picked me up. And, you know, you can see some guys in their face, you can see, especially if they're not the starter at the time when they're red shirting and there's no, you know, current goal in front of them besides, you know, get better, which is you know, a process because you're not going to hit the mat in the singlet until next season. You know, so we had a term, and I always come up with crazy terms just so they stick in their head, whether it's funny, whether it's just out of this world. And the term we have it posted all around our room. I put about 5 signs up, and we had a team meeting in the first practice back, and the term was crawl away and die. And I got the guys laughing. They're like, "What do you mean by this?" I'm like, "Well, you know what animals do when they go to die? A lot of animals they crawl away. They go and they hide, and you have to go find them. You know that's what cats do, and yeah, you know other animals." And I said, so basically, what I'm saying is, don't bring your negativity into the room in the second half of the season. Don't if you're not the starter, don't let your weight start blowing up. Keep your foot on the gas, because at any second you know, you could be in the lineup. Somebody could get hurt, somebody could get sick, and we need you. And there's, you know, as a coach, you've seen a lot of times where, you know, there's 4 or 5 duels left, and this backup doesn't, you know, he's never seen the mat, and then all of a sudden your starter goes down, and this guy's 20 pounds over or something. And you know, and scripting critical moves, that's why we weigh our guys in. You know, at least 3 times a week, we weigh them in to keep them in check so they know that, and that's helping them. You know, it's not hurting them. It's not riding them. We don't want them keep cutting weight the wrong way. And so that is scripting it and keeping them in check. But of all the points that we had during the season, now we're in our second half, and crawl away and die is one of the ones I know it's going to stick in their head. I know they're going to remember it. I know they joke about it, you know, but that way they remember it, you know, and so no negativity comes in the room. If you're sore or sick, we don't want to hear about it. When you come to practice, nobody wants to hear about it. Don't talk about it. Don't bring up anything that's not going to help this team get better in the second half of the season. But that again, that's my job to script those things, you know. And when you script them, those guys will remember it and they'll stick to it. They're more likely to stick to it than if I gave them nothing. If I just let them come back from Christmas and not have that talk with them, you know, who knows what could happen, you know. And so you got to make sure you're laying it out.
No, I to your point, everything that you said is so important because I think the tendency for a lot of coaches at this time of year, you are. I mean, as much as you want to say focus on the process, you're 2 months away from the NCAA tournament. And so it's right there. It's in front of you. Everything that you've been working for an entire year is right in front of you. So a lot of times, it's an easy tendency to just want to focus on the 10 guys that you think are going to be wrestling for you or competing for you at the conference tournament, when in reality, you know, the true test is making sure that you have the other 20 guys on board to support those other 10 guys because there could be an opportunity where that guy could step up. But, by and large, it's those other twenty guys. If they start becoming a distraction for your 10, you know, it doesn't matter how much you focus on the 10. If they're getting distracted by the other 20, you know, that's a hard it's hard for them to keep their focus and stay in their lane and keep true to the things that you've been building on for the previous 10 months, right?
Yeah, I made that mistake, Matt. My 3rd year at Campbell, I had a lot of different things I had to do. My first year was, people say, you look back and say, "Man, your first year must have been really hard." And I was like, "No, that was actually the easiest year." Right? I had 5 forfeits. There was no expectations. And, what was on me was, okay, I had to lay out the plan that I thought would be the best to build this program up, right? And so that's all I did that first year, and we based it on recruiting. When we had our 3rd year, when we won the conference and did all that stuff, I saw what had happened because I had been so focused on the starters and we were having a good year. And we thought, okay, we're going to get some guys to nationals here. We got a shot at getting a guy on the stand this year. All these things that we had never done. But in the process, I had not paid enough attention to my backups, and not paid enough attention to the guys who were redshirting. And I had not really, in fact, I didn't really feel like I had an adequate plan laid out for them in terms of their redshirt tournament list. And now what I do is I go above and beyond. I lay out that list now. I learned my lesson. I laid out my list and said, these are the tournaments you're going to do. And some of them look overwhelmed, but they don't go to all of them, right? Somebody gets hurt or somebody gets sick or something. But in the end, I want to make sure all my backups have at least 25 to 30 matches in. And so I had made that mistake as a first time head coach and not paid attention to those guys because I got so fixated on my starters. And that goes back to this chapter of not laying it out for them. You have to have a plan in place for the guys who are in the lineup, and you have to have a plan for those guys in the background so they're developing. And you got to be on their butts because if you're not on those guys, they kind of wander, and it's easy to get lost because you're caught up in what you're doing at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, without a doubt. And I think we've all made that mistake. And that's why for me, what I tried to do before the year even started, I would take a lot of times take me and my staff, and we would go on a weekend getaway. And what we would try and do is we would try and lay out the entire year, every single day. We would put a
Yeah,
plan in place, and it's not just a training plan, but a competition plan and a weight, a strength and conditioning plan, and then it went to the red shirts. Not a, we we put the current schedule in place, but also we put the red shirt plan in place with every single open tournament. So it was it was front and center and their mind. And not only did it help me navigate, but it also, gave the guys they could look at this calendar, and you would tweak it every week. You would,
yeah,
make minor alterations, but I think having that plan and laying out that plan well in advance, much, to your point, I think in episode 1, I loved what you talked about, like scripting practice for the day. And,
yeah,
um, they know what's in front of them. They know what to expect, and, in some form, they know how to plan for that as well. Um, so yeah, I think we've all made that, and I learned how to do that because I did exactly the same mistake you did. I got caught up in living in the moment and not planning ahead or doing my due diligence, and things came up and bit me at the most critical time. So I think it's those are, for some of the coaches that are tuning in and listening, yeah, like it's you're always learning. You're always learning. You're
yeah,
always making mistakes, and that's how you get better. I think I don't want to shift dramatically, but one thought that I had, reading this chapter and talking about defining your critical moves was actually the coaching that we do in a match situation, and creating a simple script for kids to follow. And by that, I mean, I think a lot of times when we're competing, we tend to overcoach kids and induce an attitude of paralysis, or um, overthinking in a match situation. And I kind of wanted to pick your brain on that, on how you approach and how you keep it simple for a guy when they're in a moment and you're trying to coach them. What do you do, and how do you check yourself? Number one, or um, as far as coaching in the corner and making sure you're effectively communicating things to your athletes where they're able to adapt and make changes in the midst of the fire.
I had one of my questions in the Ask Colette show that people asked me what, my style of coaching and what I preferred, and so I'm a high energy person. And when I look back, the people who got to me the most or helped me the most were the calm coach. Like, I'm already bouncing off the walls. And so if I'm bouncing off the walls and you're bouncing off the walls, it's just going to create chaos. So what I need is that opposite. So Burnett was a very calm, cool, and collected kind of guy in the corner. He didn't yell. Everybody thinks you got to yell in the corner. This guy he would say your name, say your name, say your name. You make eye contact, and then he would, in a very calm voice, say, "Hey, this is what you need to do right now." And then my high school coach was the same way. He was a very calm, cool, and collected kind of guy. He didn't get what he wanted by yelling at you. He didn't have to scream at you. He was able, and that's what I related to the most. That was the kind of coach that I needed. Now, somebody else, there are guys who say, "Hey, slap me in the face 10 times before I go out there," and that's the coach that they need. I think the probably the biggest thing is if you're fortunate enough and you have multiple coaches, then there should be a corner guy, right? It doesn't have to be the guy that coaches all the time in the room with that guy. That would be preferable, but you need that corner guy. Some guys are really excellent corner guys on how they handle themselves, how they handle the guys, how they talk to them. And I think I always see the biggest thing is when you got 8 guys screaming in the corner, right? There's no way the kid's gonna hear, and you got everybody screaming different things. One guy needs to be the guy that's the voice of what you're gonna do, and if he's lucky enough to know the guy, then he keeps him in his zone of, hey, this is where you want to work. This is you want to be in the match. Hey, this is a critical point right now with 30 seconds when they go out of bounds, like that can get to that guy. I don't think there should be 3 or 4 of them. And but scripting in matches, we just did it today. I mean, we had practice today, and the script was okay. We were wrestling a live go, and Mike Evans was running it. Mike does a good job. He'll throw these matches where it's a 7-minute go and you'll be wrestling. It'll be at 48 seconds. He'll blow the whistle and say, "Oh man, the guy just got you in on a crackdown. Ready, get in it." So we don't always do those situations where your turn, my turn, your turn, my turn. Guys are wrestling, and then he'll just throw them off. He'll blow the whistle and say, "Here's the situation. You're in a crackdown, and there's 20 seconds left in the period. Are you going to give him this point at the end of the first?" Right? You're teaching a guy. Last 20 seconds, those are big points, right? That's that touchdown you steal, right before halftime. That's that takedown you get with 10 seconds. The guy doesn't have time to put another escape point on the board. That you're ahead in that match in critical moments. And that's, the running practice like that, you're scripting the competition, how you're going to do it. And guys will remember it when you say it that way to them.
Yep, I completely agree. And I think, one of the things that I used to say to people, because I varied, I mean, we all get caught up in the heat of the battle. We get overly emotional. And I look back and like, I would always say, wow, you kind of got out of control. But
Yeah.
my thought was always the hay's in the barn. By the time we get to competition, if I haven't prepared you for certain situations and prepared you in such a way that I have to scream and try and get you to change in that 7 minutes, well, I didn't do my job during the week or in the previous months or in the previous year. So, um, to get completely out of control and overly emotional while you're in the corner, it's like you're almost saying I didn't do my job during the week and I got exposed in that situation. And so I think to your point about Bruce Burnett, what's so critical is like, I'm sure when he said something to you, it elicited an immediate response or made a big connection to you, right? Right away.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, if Bruce is saying something, he's just not talking to talk. He's looking at it, he's breaking it down during the period. So when I get into that 30-second break, whatever he says is going to be meaningful and impactful. And it's probably not, you know, the amount of words because he probably didn't overtalk. It was the concise nature and the effective, voice that he was directing straight to you.
Yeah, that was the right term, concise. Like, he was on point. You knew when he didn't He didn't throw a bunch of details. He was telling you exactly what you should do. And you trust him because he could see things. Bruce had been at that level for a long time, and he was a student of the sport. I mean, he really understood it at the international scene. Like he knew the guys and he knew the tactics, and so you really trusted him. And that's what everybody that wrestled for him felt that way for the most part.
Yeah, and I think the where he was so effective, and I'm just reiterating what you've already said, but the beauty of recognizing, like, emotion is gonna kill me here as a coach, because there's emotion going on in the arena, there's emotion with each call, there's emotion going on with your athlete, and so I don't need to compound that situation. I need to actually calm the situation and just talk in a normal, calm voice. "Hey, this is what you need to hear." And, that it's almost there's reassurance in that when you can look into your coach's eyes and see that ultimate confidence, that ultimate calmness, and that ultimate conciseness to the message, and the simplicity in the message that he was conveying to you in an abbreviated window, right? In
Right.
freestyle competition, you have 30 seconds to make some critical changes. And, you know, being able to have a calmness in that moment, and calm amongst the storm. I mean, that's just one of the most beautiful things. I think, Ben mentioned this in one of his Mental Mondays about, you know, that coach that is screaming over and over and over is like, "Move, move, move," or "Shoot, shoot, shoot." When when you've got, you know, in any other area of your life, that doesn't really work, right? When you got somebody
Right.
breathing down your neck, like, submit this report, do this, do that, do this, do that. That rarely ever works, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. No, it does. It's just a lot of noise. It's just a lot of noise coming at a guy when he's in a big battle right now, and it really it's not the right approach for the most part. And getting excited is normal, like right. I wanted to look in my corner sometimes and see my bench cleared and do all that stuff, but when I was in that battle where I needed a little bit of guidance, I needed to be able to hear you, and I didn't want you screaming it. I wanted to know that it was on target, keep it short, and let me know what you see that I'm not seeing, because sometimes you're in the fight, so you're so close to it that you can't see it. And you need those guys that have their eyes, they're stepping back from the situation. You can see more than what you can see. And we tell our guys all the time, listen to us. One of the key things we tell them is, look, you're not always going to see it, but we can see it. We can see when a guy's at the breaking point, and maybe it's just another couple shots that you take on him to make him fight through it. And we can see him, his gas tank is about to give out, or mentally he's giving out. And sometimes you don't recognize that, but your coaches can see that. So we always try to get our guys to make sure that they're paying attention to some of those key things. But we're at, like 35 minutes here, Matt. So it's probably a good place to end it, for this talk. And I hope everybody's following along. And if, like I said, again, the book we're reading is Switch, and it's by Dan and Chip Heath. And, if you want to pick up a copy and follow along, we're going to, the next chapter is, point to the destination. And I think that's what's really good about this book is, most of the chapters are pretty self-explanatory, but don't think it's not interesting. It's actually really interesting, some of the stuff that these guys go through, and can be really helpful. But we'll talk to you again next week. And I don't know if you have anything to add, Matt, before we sign off here.
No, I think that's perfect. I think, this book is a lot like peeling an onion. Like, I every chapter I get into, I was like, it's just a new layer and a new level of depth and analysis to break things down, and to search for, true nuggets of gold that are out there. So I think, yeah, I think this has been, you know, great. It's really enjoyable to talk to you, and look forward to doing it next week.
All right, man. Sounds good. Well, you have a good time in China, and I'll talk to you next week.
Take care, Kerry.
Bye.